Exceptional Randos show is produced live in front of a captive audience of 2 cats and 1 dog. It's pretty warm outside, but when the wind picks up, it still reminds me that it's not quite summer yet, for at least 3 months.
Well, that was random. Exceptional radio.
And good afternoon. It is, man, we're like almost 10 days into April. And it's starting to be really, really incredibly nice out almost every day.
Yeah, it's getting there. Definitely getting there.
Our groundhog has been making appearances. There's no clover in the yard for him to eat, but whatever, at least they're awake and moving about. In other rodent news, this morning I was reading about a new antigen therapy that's being developed, and they're testing it on hamsters. And this is for COVID. And it's interesting because they identified this antigen before Omicron emerges, and yet it helps to prevent pretty much all horrible crap, COVID-related crap from happening. And so this is very promising because it's not a vaccine. We can produce this thing and maybe mitigate future epidemic or endemic situations from emerging. Who knows? One thing's for sure, though, is that I'm still glad that these things are being reported on, because despite the apparent return to pre-pandemic behaviors, which I still think is kind of foolish. But, people want to go out to concerts, people want to go out to eat, that's cool. The economy's got an economy. And I'm still going to avoid crowds as much as I can.
Yeah, you would think that COVID is completely gone based on how half of the population, at least half of the population of America is acting. But people are like still dying. And it's really crazy how much, it's still spreading in terms of like it. There are some people who have changed their behaviors permanently, and then the others that like are fighting back against any sort of community protection are on the exact end of the spectrum. But then you see where they're like still suffering from long COVID and can't do the shit that they used to be able to do because of long COVID. And the people, not to say that they're the only ones suffering from it. It's more so like the people who wanted to act like COVID wasn't a real problem are the worst hit from it overall. And I think it's a matter of like, yeah, they can pretend that it's gone, but after this next wave of sickness, it's like, how many of them are going to actually be left? I think a significant amount of them have been wiped out from COVID, and it's not like they all died necessarily, but I mean, like, being made inactive is almost as bad in terms of like somebody who can't go now. They can't go out and be seen now because they can't walk more than 10 steps without fucking getting out of breath and not being able to like have to sit down again. Those people are basically taken out of society in a way. And that's where I'm like, it's this, it's the
those are
suicide bomber syndrome.
Yeah, but I think that element's vestigial now. It's silenced in a sense because the common behavior is to just, hey, we can go to shows, we can go to clubs, we can do all this stuff again. All these things. There's no sign of this stuff anywhere. Everyone's done their job, and I don't know. for the last 3 years, it seemed like there was the appropriate amount of attention being paid to deadly pathogens and behaving in a way that, gave everyone the best chance of not getting horribly sick. But we know that this thing is here and that it didn't just go away because, collectively humanity kind of failed to contain it. I think it's easy to blame the people who thought, oh, you just think the sky is falling, and but I think that there was, on some level, we all failed them, especially because they needed the most convincing, or not even convincing. They just needed to be exposed to reality, but that couldn't happen. And those people are largely silent about this stuff because there's no reason to talk about it anymore because no one's pressing it. It's not in the media anymore. We're back to shootings at malls happening every other day and people getting shot in traffic. And I guess things did kind of go back to normal. We're back to watching people get shot in malls and shot in malls again, and for different reasons, and school shootings. And
yeah, as you say, I guess it is back to normal in a sense. But it's wild,
that's such
how much the right wing normalizes gun violence, but the left wing doesn't really do anything to deconstruct it. Or I don't want to say left wing, the Democrats, because the left wing tries, but the Democrats kind of stand in their way, and the centrist Democrats. I mean, it's like there's a lot of
Democrats can't help it. They see a pile of shit and they go walk right into it. They just, it's like they can't help but set themselves up for some kind of bullshit engagement with one of their contemporaries on some issue that shouldn't. They end up arguing about the wrong things.
Well, there's so much performative,
Yeah,
display that isn't actually for making progress, that you can't take them seriously. But then, because the right wing is really good at messaging and getting their sheep to move in one direction, the Democrats have a problem retaliating against it. And I think that's where it's perpetually a problem. And they want to make it seem as if it's because Democrats are more individualistic thinking and are more questioning. They're always like, oh, it's like herding cats. No, not really. It's just a different kind of sheep in terms of you have to hit the right social justice buttons and the diversity, equity, and inclusion buttons, and then they just become the same type of sheep that don't question what's happening. So that's where it's really frustrating to see that type of sheepishness from people who I think want to make a difference, but because everything is so binary in their heads, they just fall into the actual same Republican thinking. They just want to think, oh, if Republicans think this way, I think the opposite. And in that terms, or in those terms, it just becomes polarized, sheepish antagonism. And the right wing is really good at weaponizing that to keep the left or the Democrats impotent. And I think over and over, I've tried. I mean, all you can kind of do is like either wait or start running for office yourself, which that doesn't seem to actually do anything in terms of like the people who do it end up just becoming part of the machine. So it is difficult to like. It's not difficult to criticize it. It's difficult to propose a realistic solution that doesn't involve circumventing the government. But that's supposedly the premise of capitalism. But unfortunately, it never actually works that way. So that's where it's like.
Imagine rising to the level of a congressional representative, a federal congressional representative, and being little more than a pencil sharpener and a flashlight.
Yeah.
That's kind of, it's like, great, light that thing up. Awesome. Now circle it with the pencil. Okay, great. What's next?
I mean,
you know, I wonder if we like actually.
It's not just in government though, because that's where a lot of our economy is shit that can be automated because it's become arbitrary bureaucracy. It's not that anything can be automated. It's that we've made everything so unnecessarily bureaucratic that, like, yeah, 60 to 70% of the American economy can now be automated to make it seem as if like, oh, jobs are under threat from AI. Well, no, it's just we have all this boomer shit still part of our economy because the boomers still need to feel like they're contributing, but also don't want shit like universal basic income. So they have to protect their stupid vestigial jobs that are actually threatened by automation because their vestigial jobs are artifacts of poor management. And I think that's where, again, you get this element of poor management influencing how everything operates. And it looks like that's how corporations operate at large, but it's really just widespread mismanagement. And I think that's where, again, I'm not for automation taking over jobs. It's more so I'm for excising the economy of vestigial operation and things that are unnecessary that boomers have been holding on to for decades now, that also have made it very near impossible to get past their gatekeeping to actually get into the higher paying jobs. So it's like, if it takes the prospect of AI to get rid of those jobs, whatever, fine, I'll take it. But it's not the AI, it's the boomers.
And probably to some extent, Gen X.
I mean, Gen X is definitely part of it in terms of like, they didn't really do anything to fight back against the boomers. So it's like they didn't go along with the boomers. They just didn't really fight back. And I think that's where, in their minds, they rebelled, but they actually didn't. And everybody else in the following generations had to keep suffering from boomer policy because Gen X just did not really do a good enough job in standing up to the boomer generation in terms of like taking control of both the economy, but in terms of like existence. They want to make it seem like tech bros that are like younger than us are running things, when in reality, it's still a bunch of old white dudes that look like Joe Biden making the decisions using people that are older than us because they think they're young because they're so old now to appeal to what they think are young people. It's like really funny to watch how things age out and also that's part of the reason why all this like tech what's the word? It's more it's like an implosion, but it's also a contraction. But there's like a huge tech contraction happening because as time went on, the people making the decisions behind the scenes got older and more disconnected. And the people that they're using as their faces got older and more disconnected. So it's like the chain is so far removed from the youth that it's impossible for them to actually make trends that the youth are going to latch on to.
So
And I think
recently,
that's
this is kind of interesting what you've been alluding to. Recently, Honda, their sales have actually been in decline, and in owner surveys, satisfaction surveys, like just like industry wide vehicle satisfaction, a lot of Honda owners are reporting low levels of satisfaction. Same thing with Toyota. They're both like in declining sales, and Subaru is the same way. A lot of these like brands that really have been like stalwarts of reliability and maintaining their value. A lot of the vehicles that they make are just not satisfying the American market. And so, like the head of Subaru, the head of Toyota, these guys both stepped down. The head of Subaru America even like stepped down. They're all taking like a consult. They're like going to be do consultation type stuff. They're not going to be running the show anymore. And it's interesting because like I haven't read anything about what Honda's like broad plan is to do anything about this, but it's interesting to me that Toyota and Subaru has been like, market leader for younger people for the last several years, and their reaction is like, "Hey, we're failing. Time to hand over the reins." I think that's really kind of interesting because Toyota is like a company that has traditionally, they're like always late to the game. It seems whenever they do anything technology wise, but when they deliver it, it's like their vehicles last 200,000 to 300,000 miles. I mean, that's like the expectation of a Toyota, and Hondas, you expect them to last over 200,000 miles and be relatively trouble free for the first 150,000 miles. Properly maintained, stuff like that. So it's interesting. Like there are a lot of industries that are still being run by old people, and you can tell. I tried to watch the abomination of a superhero movie called Shazam 2 or whatever the crap it was. I couldn't get through the first like half hour. It was absolutely the most horrible, like it actually made me regret turning it on. I didn't actually I didn't regret watching Black Widow. Dude, seriously, like at least Black Widow, I got to make fun of it and enjoy like how terrible it was. But this was so much worse. It was like the absolute like most painful superhero story I've seen only less than 30 minutes of. I'm glad I didn't pay for it. Holy shit. If I'd been one of those people that got duped into seeing that in the theater, I'd have been so mad. Those people are so out of touch with the audience that it's sad.
It's funny that you've seen the Shazam movie because I'm so disconnected from that universe because it's basically a dead universe that I thought that the movie had been released and had flopped, but realized now that it's like just coming out and it's like it's flopping now. It's like the flop hadn't happened yet.
Oh God, it's so bad. It was just bad. Everything about it.
I have no interest in that film. It's
I will
just
save you the trouble. Don't even like waste the time sending electricity to the pixels in your display. It's not even worth it. Like it'd be a better use of your computer to watch a screensaver for that period of time. It was terrible. It made me feel like Black Adam was like a spectacle to behold in terms of superhero movies, and Black Adam wasn't that good at all. It was just The Rock pretending to be Batman and Superman at the same time.
Yeah.
While
Black
looking like
Adam's
The Rock, which doesn't
bad.
work. Damn it, DC, you had an entirely done Catwoman movie. Or Batgirl. Fuck. They had a whole movie. Destroyed it. And then they released crap like Shazam.
Yeah. That's pretty insane that, so, you know, the Batgirl movie was not released because of supposed need to protect the integrity of their blockbuster releases. But then, like you said, that crap is what they put out. It just feels anti-black.
Batgirl, the Batgirl film, like, just destruction. It's like they were trying to hide the fact that they used fucking Viagra. And then they put out Shazam, which is like the biggest Viagra commercial ever. It's so bad. It was... Yeah. That's an example of leadership that's completely out of touch, making decisions that have that don't make any damn sense. It's like the Tennessee representative, state representative, who got booted from the floor because he participated in a protest. I mean, of course they're going to let him back in, but. Since when can our representatives not allowed to, go to protests? They can visit.
Yeah.
They can go where they want. They're the representatives of the people. They have to be able to go wherever they want. I mean, where it's reasonably safe. And if they can't,
Yeah, that whole shit scenario is just so obviously racist. It's like I struggle to think what these right-wing people perceive as the future, because it's like they can do this shit in short term. This shit is not going to last for longer than one election cycle. In terms of, they tried it with Trump and then they're trying it again, and it's like it doesn't work at the ballot boxes. So I'm wondering what the backlash against what they're doing in this term is like. If they didn't like Joe Biden, that's hilarious from my perspective as a leftist, because they're actually setting up somebody to come in and be an actual leftist at national scale. It's like when they do this in Tennessee, it's definitely going to have an impact there. But the way that they're trying to do this shit all across the nation, and the kids who are going to be of voting age soon are the ones that are the most subject to danger because of their policy. It's like they're completely ostracizing their incoming potential voting base out the gate and using them as shields for their dumbass ideas, as if the kids don't understand what's happening. So it's like, watching this, we're going to have a really left-wing next, after about 6 years, once the kids that are in middle and high school now become of voting age, shit's going to swing so far left that people aren't going to know where we're like, what country we're even in anymore because of where we're at now. And I think it's hilarious to watch the right wingers basically set this up in terms of like polarization causes equal and opposite backlash, if not stronger opposing backlash when it's so polarized. And we saw it at the voting booth in 2020 when like Biden was like the backlash against Trump, which is hilarious to think that it's two old white men causing this. They're not much different than each other effectively. Two old white men, what way wealthier than any 99% of us, are causing this backlash. In 12 years, that shit is gonna look so passe that's where, again, I'm looking at the kids that are going through what's happening now. It's not going to be like 50-50 Republican, Democrat. It's going to be like, I don't even know. Here's the thing. I don't know if they're going to identify with Democrats because the Democrats aren't really doing much to protect them. So I feel like they're going to be left of Democrats in the tune of like six out of 10 will be left of Democrats. 3 may be Democrats, and then 1 may be a Republican. And that's where I think that breakdown of the future of incoming voters is going to fall. And I don't mean just like arbitrarily left. It's like they're not going to trust cops. They're not going to trust institutions that rely on police officers to like keep peace because it didn't work in the fucking schools. So them coming up with a proper, healthy distrust of authority, a proper understanding that Democrat and Republican feed off of each other. And in terms of like left and right wing, the Democrats keep drifting right. So the left wing isn't actually Democratic necessarily anymore. I think all these kids are going to know all this shit out the gate by the time they're like 18, which makes the like college experience even more different in terms of like a lot of people get their liberal whatever awakening in college because they were sheltered under their parents' roof from information one way or another. And then it's like once they're free, quote unquote, to access information, that's when they learn all of the things that their community or whatever is hiding from them, which is why all this attempts at hiding racism is just going to make that shit even worse. So it's the repeated ignorance of history is making the backlashes against their surges of right-wing policy stronger every time, because it looks like on the one hand, like, oh, the right-wing surges are, it's like they're burning crosses again, or, you see swastikas. Well, that's mainly because the left-wing rebellion in the youth is getting stronger and stronger with every generation. I feel like the coming is going to be the strongest ever in terms of like, again, them seeing right-wing people, not Republicans. I mean right-wing people, even the ones that pretend to be Democrat, because we got a lot of those. They'll see right-wing people and understand that the language and the framing that they use is never with good intention, and it's never with honesty or integrity at the core, and it's always about manipulation and fascism. So they've grown up seeing that and are not necessarily immune to the double think, but I think they are much more aware of when it's happening and are better able to troll them, which is why the boomers hate them and want to like they wanted to mock them so bad and start making fun of their grandkids. So that's why I feel like millennials got a lot of the collateral damage from older people wanting to like go after, at the time, kids that were under 18 that were just making the fucking boomers and up look completely idiotic. But because it just did not look right, because even then, you got the Greta Thunbergs where it's like you got a bunch of people feeling comfortable going after what was it, like 14 when she first started hitting the scene, and then like
it doesn't matter.
16,
She might as well have
17.
been 12.
Right, but they didn't. The only time they really did that before was like Chelsea Clinton, as much as they did to Greta Thunberg. And the way they've gone after her, and it's like okay for them to like attack a child, is it's telling. But I don't think, again, Gen X and by proxy Gen Y are aware enough of the younger people seeing it and paying attention to it, so they don't point it out as much. Because if it was like, regardless of what you think about what Greta Thunberg says, the idea that a grown person would attack anything a kid says is fucking absurd. And that person should never be listened to about anything serious. The fact that they made it okay for all the grown people in their party to attack a child and attack a child's desire to like make the world a better place, nobody should ever listen to them again about anything. Again, regardless of what you think about Greta Thunberg's views, it's a fucking kid.
Yep.
You don't attack that kid, because that's the same shit whenever they had that that like right-wing kid that was like the Newsweek subject, and he was like suing. It's like, yeah, guess what? You don't fucking attack kids. You don't like go after a kid's views, even if you don't agree with them, because it's a fucking kid. Just let them be. They can't even vote yet. Why do you care what this fucking dumbass kid thinks? He supports Donald Trump. Guess what? He can't fucking vote. Let him be a fucking dumbass. That's why you don't attack kids. And then you find out the dude that like verbally assaulted him was a douchebag too. So it's like there's things about, if a kid becomes an activist, whether you agree with them or not, attacking that kid is usually a litmus test. Like, you can do it in your own home. Nobody's going to hear it. But when you go out and do that shit publicly, that makes you a huge asshole that should never be listened to again about anything, which is where, again, there's just little things like that where it's not a little thing, but the fact that so many right-wing people are willing to attack a child's views, they're just unserious. They shouldn't be. They don't act in good faith. They're willing to attack children, and then will pretend that they are doing things to protect children. No, these are the motherfuckers that will go out and verbally assault a child, knowing damn well that child can't ever see those things, but other people can see it. So it's like, the things that people do when they think they're aiming it at somebody who's never going to see it, it's like, pay attention when you're in proximity, because it's like, yeah, I don't like the Kardashians or whatever, but I'm not gonna like put a bunch of energy into slandering them and like dragging them down publicly, because the only people that are going to see that are the people that are close to me. Like, the Kardashians are never going to see if I fucking care about them or not. So like, me putting that out there is like only serving to make me look a certain type of way to people around me. And that's where, again, it's like, I know these things in terms of, like, if I comment on, like, there was fights last night. If I post a comment about a fight, I'm not expecting the fighter to necessarily see that comment. And I understand it's only my friends that are going to see that. So that's who it's usually aimed at in terms of like the self-awareness. Whereas other people, because the internet is public and it exists, they do think that people see their shit or that they have a right to be seen by the person that they're talking to or posting at. And then they get angry if they aren't seen, and it makes them even more angry. Because you see this on like,
Man, that happened to fucking John Lennon. That crazy person like thought John Lennon was like,
yeah, I mean, it's happened to a lot of stars, but you see this with women in terms of like dudes posting in women's. It'll be a person who a woman has never clearly interacted with, and the guy will post something like, I think you're really attractive. Here's my name and a picture of myself, blah, blah, blah. And the woman won't respond. And then the guy will start getting mad about it. But it's like 50-year-old and up type that it's like, I've seen this on so many comment threads where I'm like, what the fuck is this person thinking in terms of like, I feel like it's like they might have some sort of learning disability, but it's like common across a certain type of dude. But they think that also they're really attractive and that them just posting a picture of themselves to a woman's like comment thread is going to get the response of like the woman then sexually throwing herself at him. But it's like, I've seen it so many times where I'm like, what's going on here? Like, what's the intersection of delusion because of social media making people think they're the center of attention, but also the ability to post at random people that you know that you can make things in a circle or make it so it's not completely public. But unless your profile is locked, or I think what is it, private in Instagram or whatever, you're effectively open to anybody who wants to approach you and message you. Because like I know my messages are filled with spam of people trying to message me about the next crypto thing, or you know, it's like anybody can message anybody, and then on the post, anybody can effectively post to anybody, and that has made a bunch of dudes delusional in a way that I think it existed before in the 80s when stardom and I mean it definitely existed in the 60s and 70s, not to as large a degree as the 80s when movie stars started to happen like way more, and like rock stars started to happen. So this is where I think on the one hand it's like when the delusion happens with men, it becomes obsessive, and like the compulsion is not necessarily returned. But then on the other hand, when it was like an obsession with women or from women towards men, the men would take advantage of it, and that's where you get the groupies and all that shit. So it became like romanticized for the women to be taken advantage of, while the men all fucking look crazy because it's insane. So that I think that it also exacerbates the men who get obsessed in terms of their anger and their like response to how society sees them, because it's like, yeah, it's not cute when a guy does it, but if a girl like there's that story about Robert Pattinson like taking his stalker out on a date and boring her to death, or not to death, but
just boring
telling
crap
her
out of her.
Right, so she stopped being obsessed with him. Well, a woman couldn't do that. So it's like there are these things about the way that women stalkers are just made to be this like innocuous little it's like they're just a inconvenience. They're not actually going to threaten you. They're threaten your life. It's like as if the woman who killed Selena wasn't a crazy fucking like psycho. So it's like the way that women are dismissed as dangers in their obsession it kind of enables the male counterparts to exist. So
I
it's
seem
like,
to recall an astronaut who abducted
oh
a
yeah,
woman
oh
and
yeah,
wore a
of course,
diaper and drove
dude.
like across the fucking country in a diaper
Being a
with a person in her
psycho,
trunk.
like who crosses lines, is not something that is only restricted to gender.
Oh yeah, it's
And
not.
the idea that like only men can be crazy is like another form of misogyny
But
that is like hilariously counterproductive. It's not hilarious.
so
It's counterproductive
to that
very
astronaut's
much.
credit, that was actually very impressive. I don't think that's not the kind of thing that we normally read about ever. The diaper thing, fucking brilliant. Who thinks of that shit?
And that's like the school shooter being a woman. I don't know her age, but not a man in the recent one.
Oh, they were 28. The one
So
in Tennessee.
the idea that happened, and then that it's like it shouldn't be a shock that it's a woman, because women don't generally do school shootings or mass shootings. It's like, well, they could. It's just not as common because dudes do it way more. And the idea that they wouldn't do it or couldn't do it is really fucking stupid and misogynist in its own weird way. That like there are these things in terms of like, it seems counterintuitive, but making it seem like violence is only a male outlet is like inherently misogynistic in a weird way, in terms of like, you're not actually a feminist if you're making it seem like you think women are incapable of violence. That's not the look people think it is. But I think a lot of Dennis Reynolds types will just like take that, oh, women are soft and they need to be protected, and you know, that like it feels like it's actually, it's feminist drag, in terms of, if you haven't caught up with the times, you would think that that's a normal way to look at femininity and like masculinity, and just like draw violence as a completely masculine thing that only men do or are capable of. But it's like, then some people want to take that shit to the extreme in terms of like domestic violence being equal. And it's like, no, that's not the natural extension of that either. And domestic violence is never right. And that's, you know, I think that's like, false equivalences are really easy to employ when gender binaries are, they're fluid. Even the notion of the binaries themselves are fluid. But when people try to make it out to seem as if they are only binary and rigid in their juxtaposition, that's like an archaic perspective and inflexible. And I think that's just where inflexible viewpoints should really be left behind, but we are increasingly dealing with more vocal, inflexible viewpoints. And I think that's where it feels like there's more of them. I think it just seems like it because they're more vocal.
I wonder how many times they factor in, or if like when someone walks into a house and kills everyone inside the house, if that's considered a mass shooting too. If they reach the the whatever metric they use, like the number of people.
I think it's like 3 or more people.
Yeah, so like back in 2020, a guy in Utah walked into his house and killed his wife, her mom, and their 5 kids. So that's like 7 people. And in 2023, police found January of this year. Wow, police found 8 people, including 5 children. Oh, that's the same one.
It says minimum of 4 people.
Okay, a New Jersey man earlier this year killed his wife and 2 kids, and then turned the gun on himself. But I don't think he killed himself. Let's see. Man kills wife and 3 children, North Carolina. Like.
Okay, so this is why I was confused. There's like different definitions by different outlets.
Okay.
And then
family of 3, double murder, suicide.
U.S. federal law, the term is defined as the murder of 4 or more people with no cooling off period. But redefined by Congress in 2013 as being the murder of 3 or more people.
Yeah, so,
and that's mass killings and not mass shootings.
So a mass killing could be a mass shooting if there's a gun.
Yeah, or again, it could be a knife, or it could be a car, a fucking crane. It doesn't have to be a gun.
Let's see. An Ohio woman killed 3 family members before turning the gun on herself. Mom accused of killing her children built a snowman. Jealous ex-boyfriend kills Rome woman in murder-suicide. Mother jumps out of window after allegedly killing 3 kids. Man cuts out woman's heart and cooks it. What the fuck? Man. I mean, this is like the stuff that never makes it into my news feed.
Yeah, mine either. I mean, I feel like you don't have to go far to find it, but
of course not.
This is the shit that's on like Facebook.
Yeah, but like why?
Well,
but for whatever reason, Google decides it's like gonna give me a bunch of regional reporting about the Delaware mall shooting that happened yesterday evening.
Yeah, I didn't see anything about that.
That's the thing.
Wild.
It's wild. Like, I guess now so I've refreshed an hour later, and I don't see anything about it. Oh no, there it is. Okay. Yeah. NBC, CBS finally. CNN they have a tweet about it though. When did tweeting replace actual coverage of anything?
That's a good point in terms of like, at some point, news outlets started covering tweets, and then it became ubiquitous. And it seemed like anything that was important information had to have some sort of Twitter reference just to make it valid. And this was way before Elon took over. And I think...
Oh, God.
What's up?
No, just the idea that somehow Twitter had become a mainstream like conduit for news, or aggregating enough information that it was like this was deciding what was news now.
Oh well, and it's partially that, but whenever there was like a point in Iran when their information was restricted, like their internet was restricted, and they could still use Twitter over like dial-up or something. Yeah. And I think that was like when it got its...
You could send a tweet over a DNS request.
Yeah, so they got validated as being a way to get around government censorship, and then it gave the platform way more cred again. So it became this notion of getting things out quicker than you know what? I remember exactly what it was too. You're gonna when I say this, you'll remember the fucking dude tweeting about when they found bin Laden.
Oh yeah.
Remember that? Because he tweeted about it before they did the fucking the raid. The dude tweeted about this shit like I think it was as it was happening, or some shit happened where it was like he was the first person to put out any sort of information about Osama bin Laden being found. And then it got released to the news, within a day or within the next week or something, that the raid had actually gone down.
Yeah.
But it was that point that people realized that Twitter was the quickest, not just Twitter, but social media in general was quicker at getting information out than any news outlet was possible. But then once that was proven to be true, it gave it that cred in terms of like ever so often somebody's going to post something to Twitter that's going to seem like it's like not real because the news hasn't broken it yet, but it's real. And that changed everybody's perception of the possibility of things being posted to Twitter being real before it's posted anywhere else. And I think ever since then, that's why it's like, yeah, you can go to, almost have to go to Twitter first to look for anything new, but then you look for other validating sources because you can't trust shit on Twitter. So that's why it's like, it hasn't lost its credibility in terms of being one of the first places things will be broken as far as news goes, but it's still
it's still a functional infrastructure for the distribution of information.
Right, but it's not credible.
It's
like,
been polluted.
People know
there's no curation.
People know it's not credible, so they have to validate it somewhere else. So Twitter on its own is not going to be a viable source of information. Well, there was like a period of time where, maybe 2016 to like 2019, you couldn't really trust anything that was posted on there, but it was way more rigorously vetted by the people on Twitter itself. So by the time the thread got finished, things were way more vetted.
Well, I imagine like another Iran type situation where a country decides to go, information blackout, but they don't want to cut off all, information lines. So people are still able to send a tweet over DNS because that technology probably still exists unless Elon completely fucked it, which isn't out of the realm of possibility. Hopefully that kind of thing can still function. But maybe something like that's like a use case where in the hands of people just like, crying out for help in mass, that might actually still be a functional use for this platform. Okay, where it's like, oh yeah, shit, there are like, 16,000 tweets in this region and they're all saying shit's fucked up. Send help now. Maybe that's actually reliable. But that's like a whole lot of information that has to be considered all at once.
But also, that shouldn't be relying on.
We shouldn't be relying on Twitter for that
American
kind of
company.
Either. Yeah, no, you're right. Fortunately, there are a bunch of like open source platforms that have emerged, not Twitter. Maybe those things can become the digital whatchamacallit. What are they trying to say? There's like the town hall, a digital town hall, global digital town hall can emerge and people can actually talk about things. No, that won't work. That'll just end up like Reddit.
But a global town is an oxymoron in itself.
Yeah.
So I think that's where the whole premise is like dead
Wait.
on arrival.
So it's like the Dyson Council convention. There just isn't any.
And
Go ahead.
well, this is where the notion of public goods are starting to emerge from the Web3 space as like, uh, I guess what would be global utilities. And I don't know how much that movement is going to catch on, but I feel like it's like the last gasping breath of crypto. It's the last shot in the dark to see if crypto catches on. But it's like crypto is it's so negatively seen that nobody wants to be associated with it anymore. I don't see new people getting into it, and it feels like it's all but dead. Where it's just like on life support, and if public goods are legitimate in in what they're framing, then it might work out. But the way the track record of the space, it's like it most of the people in public goods are probably just grifters too. Can't trust anybody anymore. There's like no real reason to. You would think that capitalism would incentivize telling the truth in terms of your product, but it's done the exact opposite for the last 60 years, if not longer, encouraging people or corporations to over exaggerate the capacity of their products to benefit and improve people's lives. And that's where, at a certain point, because that's been the case for so long, people are no longer going to trust any sort of claims. So I'm wondering if we're past the point of capitalism's capacity to like sell new things. Like even the AI, it's like a hard sell. Like you have a bunch of organizations that want to use AI, but even at that, it's not. The ethical implications make it near impossible for the AI to be adopted ubiquitously and like immediately. So it's there's something disconnected in like automation is meant to serve humans in terms of like making human lives easier. So if automation only makes a few humans' lives easier at the expense of way more human lives, then it's not actually good automation. And I think that's where automation to the detriment of large segments of society to the benefit of small segments of society has been framed as technological progression when it's actually regression. And a regression towards feudalism, which makes it even more like it when we start regressing towards feudalism because of capitalism, it feels as if capitalism was never meant to do anything but make society regress towards feudalism or move back towards an even smaller concentration of capital ownership while claiming to be setting up the capacity for more people to have access to capital. And on the one hand, when the capital distribution is increased, but also the concentration is exacerbated in terms of proportion, you can claim like more people have money, but at the same time, that money being worthless does not necessarily improve those people's lives. And a lot of what has been framed as like first world life improvement is capitalism exploiting people's materialism, where it's like I've been in one of the biggest slums, and the idea of somebody having a big screen TV but no roof over their head is like so ass backwards to me in terms of like, you would think that a person would get a roof before a big screen TV, but the big screen TV is more accessible than a roof. And that's what capitalism brought us, where it's like it was making it seem as if it had all of the
And you're not talking
basic
about a
needs
person who
met.
has like a functional home and then they happen to have a TV that just lives outside.
No, I'm talking about, this is like in a brick open abode that has like a tarp over the top, and there's no real door. There's no real doors. There's no real.
It sounds like the kind of place that should be condemned.
It's a fucking slum. Like
Yeah.
I'm not talking about like a building. I'm talking about like an actual like
A shack.
no, not even. This is like, again, like I'm talking like mud brick.
Oof.
Not clay, mud. But they have a fucking big screen TV. So it's like you would think again that person living in like a clay, brick, mud space, because it's not a house, it's not an abode, it doesn't have closed doors, it doesn't have closed walls, it's not an actual home, but they got a fucking TV. So that's where, like I said, there's something weird about the way capitalism has to lie about itself perpetually, while also regressing everything in a way that it projects onto other forms of economic capital distribution. Like supposedly communism does the things that capitalism does, but it's really like 9 out of 10 times it's capitalism. But, you know, that all said, it's like it does seem that the military industrial is like folding in on itself, and then capitalism, as far as like it's overextended itself. Where do these tech companies go from here? Facebook, Google, Microsoft, fucking name a company they've cut jobs in the last more, you know, it's not just the last 3 years, but in the last 6 or 7 years, there's been a lot of pump cycles in the tech space that have resulted in major crashes, and it wasn't just crypto. Like Theranos is still a huge problem in terms of how it's affected people's capacity to trust tech investment. But it's like the 30 under 30 has had a problem with tech companies and tech billionaires getting on there that were using nefarious means to make their money. And now the Binance CEO is under fire. So we'll see if this. I don't think it's going to go away immediately. But this culture of tech, trying to create tech billionaires and unicorns, is like on the deathbed.
I saw a picture of or it was one of those like unicorns are real thing, like memes, and it had a picture of a rhinoceros.
Yeah, that's about what we have left in the tech world. There's a bunch of rhinoceri pretending to be unicorns.
Running around, stampeding through things. A rhino in a server farm. That's like a bull in a china shop, right? That's what's happening to Twitter. It's actually kind of sad. Like, as much as I like don't like Elon's whatever the decision making process and what it's resulted in, and like I'm still kind of pissed off about conflict batteries. That's kind of bullshit. But like going into a company that's functioning and doing something that people like actually like, and then changing everything and thinking like that.
Well, it's funny how much of his Twitter failure is just to overshadow his Neuralink failure and the Optimus bot failure. Because remember, he was promising how he's going to revolutionize robotics.
Oh God! Well,
and then they brought out the bullshit fucking
guy in a suit.
hydraulic. Yeah. Oh my God. The guy in the suit is one thing, but then the actual quote unquote robot they tried to bring out was clearly just some radio controlled shit that wasn't not even remotely autonomous. And they've really been quiet about Optimus since, I feel like Optimus was the last thing he tried.
Well, they hooked up
publicly.
They hooked the Neuralink chip up into a pig, and then they tried connecting it to the Optimus robot. But then all it did was root around looking for shit, and it didn't do anything like they expected. Obviously.
Well, but have you heard about all the horrible Neuralink shit?
Oh, like all the animals that died?
Not just died, but they were like
tortured.
The horrible deaths where they were like puking and they were like scraping at the pieces and trying to remove them constantly. So it's like the Neuralink trials were going terribly. I think it was like over 50% of the monkeys either committed suicide or died.
I think
they
it's
were
something like
killing.
I'm pretty sure it's even worse. I think it's something like 86% of the animals that they tested died.
Mm-hmm.
Like they and the ones that didn't die, they had to put down because they were so fucked up. Like they didn't have success with that program. They should be like charged with animal cruelty on like the highest degree that can be delivered. Like,
which again, that's where it feels like Twitter is like just him trying to distract from that. He could do all kinds of crazy shit with Twitter, but it's not going to end with animals committing suicide. as far as we know, and that's where anything he does on Twitter is going to be much better than the Neuralink news that would. If he didn't own Twitter, the Neuralink news cycles would really have destroyed his credibility. And if anything, he just bought Twitter to like delay that shit. Because then, even then, it was what was it? The horse for the hand job trade that came out, attempted trade.
Oh yeah, on the plane with the flight attendant.
Oh, flight attendant, yeah.
Yeah, that was.
But it's like there was clearly shit that he was trying to bury, and in the process of purchasing Twitter, it made it easier for him to control news cycles.
Yeah,
what it came down.
Well, there was that one dude who was like had an entire Twitter profile or account devoted to tracking Elon's plane, like his private jet. And he said he wasn't gonna kick the guy off the platform, but then he kicked him off the platform, but then let him back, and I'm pretty sure he got kicked off again.
Well, he kicked him off for quote unquote endangering someone by posting their real time coordinates, and then I think a week later he posted himself at the World Cup, which was why people were making fun of him because he kicked the kid off, but then he clearly was like only he uses rules to go after people he doesn't like, and then other people can violate the rules and nothing gets done about it.
He should have just hired that dude or whoever it was with the account to like track his whereabouts and let people know and be his personal like let people know where I am dude, and like that would have been more interesting. He's not.
He tried to pay him off, but the kid wanted more money. The kid's a douchebag too.
Yeah, well, of course.
Well, kid could have been cool, but it was like Elon paid him like $5,000 and the kid wanted $50,000 or something. So it was just more so Elon didn't bring enough money, and it was never about anything more than money.
Well, yeah.
It was like the kid. There was a universe in which the kid was cool and had some integrity.
Not this universe.
It wasn't not this universe. So,
yeah, that comes as no surprise.
Well, it's like you find out about not you, but when you find out about somebody who's like a hacker or does something where you're like, oh, that's cool. And then you find out they're like super racist or some shit. And then it's like, oh, that didn't last for longer than a week. Like there was this guy, he's like a 19, well, now he's probably 21 or 22. He was a mathematician that he found this flaw in the code of some DeFi platform, and it allowed him to like do this recursive command that withdrew, I think it was 18 million from their platform or some it was at least 1 million. I want to say 18 million, if not more than that. And when they called him out on it, the dude, it was like he was making all these platitudes about like fighting for the little guy and all this shit. So he was like becoming a cult hero in the first 24 hours. And like everybody was like on this dude's side. And then the next 24 hours, all the racist shit starts coming out. And then suddenly it was pretty funny in terms of once the racism came out, there were some people who still supported him, but then he got doxxed, and then it was like discovered who he was, and then he lost his affiliation with the school program he was in, and it wasn't too much longer after that. I think they initiated like a criminal investigation, but it was like for the first 24 hours, this dude was like Robin Hood. And everybody was on his side. And then it's like, again, I feel like with hackers specifically, there's this undercurrent of racists that overlap with it where you're like, you can't support a hacker out the gate. Like Kim.com, uh, dude does some super questionable shit. Like you have to really look at a hacker's background before you like publicly support anything they do. And not to say that all black hats are like, or not all hackers are black hats. Um, but it's like a weird, uh, it's like a weird flag when somebody is willing to cross one line in such a way, because it's like on the one hand, like yeah, of course Elon's this rich dude, fucking he should be paying more than $5,000 to somebody who was like tracking his plane to get them to stop tracking his plane. But on the other hand, the person who's doing that and is also like, actually, this isn't enough what you're offering me, that's a fucking huge red flag. That's why again, hackers are a weird group in terms of there's so much potential for them to do public good, but a lot of them are just shit people. They're just like garbage human beings that just happen to know some shit about code. Or manipulating human beings in uh, the case that they go after the human and not the target, like the social engineering as a vector is just as good, if not better, than learning how to code to hack. But I know some of the teachers that I've had, it's like a good person is not going to use those tools to do bad things. But a bad person will definitely use those tools and sometimes will accidentally do good things. And that's where, that's the issue, is like getting wrapped up when somebody accidentally does something good is like, that's especially easy to do in the crypto space. Because there was a lot of hacks that were like, you think you should be cheering them on because they're like hitting a big faceless no name corporation, but then they go on and hit a bunch of individuals and fuck over a bunch of little people because they don't give a fuck.
See, Black Box Linux, Kali Linux, Arch Strike, Parrot, Black Arch, Kane. Ooh, Computer Aided Investigative Environment. That's a great name. Huh. I mean, it's not like it's hard to find penetration testing tools and then hopefully use them ethically, but
Yeah, it's like they're not hard to find, but you first have to know what to look for,
yeah,
and then know how to
use the
deploy
tools
it without hurting your own machines.
Yeah.
I don't know if you watched those hacking the scammer videos on YouTube, but they're pretty fun in terms of like it's clearly somebody who's using those tools for good, but in the process you see the people they're going after are using the same shit for bad. So it's like for every one person that's doing a good thing, there's like 10 people doing bad things with that same technology. So it only takes the one good person to start bringing the other ones down, but it's really like illuminating to watch the attitudes of the people who are doing the wrong, because in terms of like, they can really pretend that they care about other human beings, but then when you see what they're doing, they clearly don't.
Yeah.
So the notion of like having to operate in society with those types of people that are so good at, I mean, to certain people, they're going to be obvious in terms of not actually caring about other humans, but it's the ones that they can trick that keep them scamming. As far as, for every scammer, they only need 1 out of every 10 people to bite for them to keep doing it. And that's where it's like, we're on a weird cusp of trust still existing in society, and then people exploiting that trust as a means of surviving, because they're not given many opportunities to survive any other way. But that's not, it's not an excuse, but it's also not viable for this to continue. So I think that's why people just can't continue to exploit forever, perpetually.
Yeah.
It's unsustainable as a cycle, because eventually there's not going to be anything left to exploit if that's the only thing happening. And I think that's where you've got so much exploitation happening on the small and macro scale that where I feel like we're again about to hit this wall of that, the limitation of that type of economic growth. And I don't know, I don't really know what it's going to look like in terms of like, I'm not going to pretend I know, but I do know the way that, like Levi jeans, for example, Levi 501 jeans, the way that they were trying to mass produce and mass sell a style as if by proxy of everyone wearing it, it's not going to make that style obsolete. That type of short-term, inconsistent, incoherent approaches to capital distribution isn't going to keep going forever. We're definitely, like, fashion specifically had already started to downsize itself. But I don't think fashion is the only industry that's going to be hit by that contraction. And whether it's McDonald's and fast food, or AAA games and the gaming companies, or the companies that make the gaming consoles but then don't put money into the AAA gaming industry and expect the industry to sustain itself. That's just not going to keep happening. And I look at indie developers and indie studios, and it's like they can only save us if they survive. And big companies have done such a good job of killing off indie companies that I hope that they did not do a good enough job that there's no small companies left to get us through this coming period. But it's like, it almost looks like, I imagine how the last wave of dinosaurs must have felt like. Imagine being a brontosaurus or a fucking Tyrannosaurus Rex, and there not being enough food to sustain you. And you're like the last of your species because like assuming that the meteorite didn't take out everything, like there's going to be some leftovers that aren't going to be able to sustain their size because there's not enough vegetation or other living tissue to sustain that massive entity. But you have to like still die off and go through the process of starvation and not being able to reproduce because there's nothing to sustain you and there's no one to reproduce with. It's like,
yeah, and you can't just like, eat a bullet because guns haven't been invented
right
yet, because you're a brontosaurus. I'm digging this. No, this is...
and again, that's where in terms of the economy, it feels like, because I don't have a god level view of everything, it feels like all these brontosauruses and T-Rexes ate up all of the shit they thought was going to be around forever. And, you keep swallowing up the small companies that keep popping up, and you keep acquiring and you keep acquiring. But eventually those small companies stop popping up. And then there's a big chill on the economy. And suddenly these massive fucking dinosaurs of corporations are slowly dying off and fucking slowly starving in front of our eyes. And there's nothing they can do about it but just starve because they have nothing else to consume. And that's where I'm like, I know it feels bleak, but life just downsized is what happened in terms of like the amoebas never died off. It was like life had to reset the scale and get to a more manageable scale. And we never got fucking brontosauruses walking the earth again. Yeah, we got blue whales in the ocean, but that's because the plankton and the amoebas are never going to, not never, but are way more difficult to get rid of. So when the smallest life is more viable, the largest life is ironically more viable. It doesn't
also because
seem
water can support their mass a lot better than some legs. There's no way they could ever get that big and have legs. They'd just crush their own legs.
But they used to be. Like, that's, a brontosaurus and a humpback or a blue whale are roughly the same size.
Blue whales have like a much bigger body. Blue whales are huge. Real huge.
They're like 100 feet long, and it's like the body of a brontosaurus from head to tail, I think, was roughly 100 feet there was the brontosaurus, I think, was 30 to 60, but there was like a titanosaurus that was the bigger version that was the size of the blue whale. And because even then, the megalodon, so it's not like there has been a downsizing even in ocean animals. Like the blue whale is not the biggest ocean animal to ever live. Like they've shrunk, but it's a matter of the ocean can sustain more viable or bigger species than land because their micro life was able to sustain better than on land. And that's where like, it's not to say that, yeah, of course they have big animals in the water, but they used to be bigger. It's the land not having as much viability for the plant or animal life on the smaller scale. Again, that is why you can't get the larger land species in the same way that you can in the ocean. And it's like,
we also don't have much oxygen in our atmosphere.
Well, it's nitrogen. It's nitrogen that's like the big thing that made the animals grow. There was a much larger proportion of nitrogen in the atmosphere, and that was supposedly one of the things that, at the depths of the ocean, you still get that larger concentration, which is why you're able to get much more massive animals in the ocean today than you can on land. So it's like the oxygen and the nitrogen, but also, again, the bioavailability of these potential, whether it's food or the things necessary for breathing. It's if there's not, again, if you would think that the larger animals being the largest is going to be the best for Darwinism in terms of like the way survival of the fittest is framed. It's in the context of other weak things also still existing. But if there's only something strong left and there's nothing else left, that strong thing is eventually going to die off by proxy of not having any things to sustain it. And that's where, again, it's like the notion that the apex predator needs things to predate, it seems obvious. But in the context of an economy, when it's deconstructed from nature as if there's no natural counterpart to the way businesses evolve, then it's okay for the T-Rex to eat everything and in their heads. And that's where, I mean, like, I know it's a convoluted fucking metaphor or analogy, but when you really analyze it, that's what they were doing in terms of like, they were just gorging themselves on anything that was smaller than them. They ate everything up, and now that we're hitting the fucking meteor asteroid period, fucking nothing, like nothing growing for them to consume is now starving them. And I feel like, again, it sounds, from the perspective of someone who bought into infinite growth, the idea of these things being too big to the point of being able to sustain themselves, like they used to call it too big to fail. And in terms of how they thought bloating organizations help to prevent them from dying off, it's like unnecessary bloat and unnecessary size is almost a guarantee that when resources become tight, that thing will specifically and explicitly die off due to starvation.
And now I'm thinking about pies. Fuck. Yeah, it's strange because you'd think because we make pies that we could just keep on making more pies. We can't distribute the pies even if we could make enough pies. Even if we make plenty of pies. We make enough pies for everybody. People won't distribute the pies.
But it's like, even then,
They just want the pies for themselves.
well, once someone realizes that there's a demand, then they try to control that supply, and then one person's sitting on all the pies, and then somebody tries to compete, and then it's like that arbitrary desire to control the flow of
Confections.
resources. It's definitely something that is not, is not specific to Christianity, but Christianity is like a very specific point in time that asserted that we're, as a species, the ones to arbitrate that resource allocation for the entire planet. So the notion that human beings are supposed to do it for other species, even though we can't do that shit for ourselves, it's clearly misguided. Like if we can't make sure other human, like all humans are fed, we have no business worrying about how many deer or how many wolves are in the forest and shit like that. When I like we gotta make sure we can take care of our own. But this notion of like humans being the uh what's the word they use? It's like the humans are
The stewards of the wilderness.
stewards. Yes, yes, the stewards. Because it's all about shepherds and the stupid fucking shepherd.
I can see some like farmer who has like a bunch of sheep or cattle or farmlands wanting to make sure that some kind of coyote, wolf, or wild pig doesn't destroy their investment in agriculture. And I can see how this, like the state of Texas, should actually be very keenly interested in encouraging people to kill wild pigs, because those things cost the state like $1 billion a year in agricultural damages. Which, I mean, it's actually a lot. A billion's a huge number, but like, and we're on the verge of, or we're on the, let's see, Canadian super pigs entering the United States on the northern border is on the horizon. These things are like extra tough and can survive winters in Canada, and they're headed south where it's warm, where they're just going to be able to eat all year round. So these are things where I can see like, yeah, there's a reason why we might want to come up with solutions to managing threats to agricultural systems. And that makes sense, but yeah, the wilderness management to me always seemed like an oxymoron. It's like it's wilderness because there aren't any humans there. It's doing its own thing. It can manage itself. Wildlife management. Well, it's not wild if you're managing it. It's like an outdoor zoo with no cages. I have a bird feeder. It's called a mimosa tree. It manages itself and provides hummingbirds with plenty of nectar to satisfy them throughout the warmer months of the year, and plenty of cover for other birds. I don't have to do anything except wait for it to rain, and that thing does its own job. I'm pretty pleased with it. That's like, to me, that's wildlife management. I sit back and enjoy it. People.
Well, even then, it's like, there'll be times when, like, there was like a avian flu where you weren't supposed to feed the wildlife and shit. And
no
it's like,
seeds.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like that type of shit is that big of a deal, but yeah, you can't be doing things that encourage birds to gather in groups, but also not be wary of the dangers of them gathering in groups. And that's like one of the responsibilities that comes with it. So it's also, there is this level of, if you're going to be in a situation where you're bringing nature into your life, you have to be wary of your impact on nature and how, like, it can feel like you're doing a good thing, but it's sometimes got negative impacts. But knowing where that line is, I think, is also important. And it's like being honest with oneself about that line is like, I think it's more difficult than it would seem. But if you actually care about the animals, I don't think it's that difficult.
I mean, it's so easy just to stand like 50 feet away from the mimosa tree and stare through it, and then you start to ignore the tree and see all the stuff that's moving around, and then once you can see the hummingbirds and doing their thing, there's no interactivity with that beyond watching. Like once you are standing still enough to see everything and they start moving again, you don't move, you just enjoy it. The only interaction I have with that tree is I trim certain portions of it that are dead, and then I leave it alone. I mow around the bottom of it so that it doesn't get overrun by wisteria. Also, it allows Bruce to pee on it, which I think, well, I approve of that because he's a dog and he can do that kind of thing. But yeah, like when I discovered that the groundhog was interested in the clover on the other side of the garage and of the garden in the yard, and wasn't even interested in the garden, and that's when I knew it's like, oh, that thing, I don't have to worry about it. I just had to keep Bruce from chasing the poor bastard. And then when I saw that it was definitely rabbits getting in and chewing on tomatoes and cucumbers, I didn't feel as bad when, it's very clear that Bruce is chasing after the rabbit because those are my tomatoes. Also, deer seem to like chewing on tomatoes. I don't really like that. That kind of bothers me. But, what can you do? They're deer. We live in Indiana. This is deer central. We have deterrence, but that's only, that they only go so far. Because I'm not actively trying to, kill deer in my backyard, which is illegal. And I know better.
Yeah.
But even then, I think that's part of the deal. When you live in an environment that is shared with other organisms, as long as they're not delivering pathogens, as long as they're not a pathogen vector and not causing illness, we can coexist with things. It seems like it should be really easy to coexist with things, but I guess maybe not.
Well, I think it's we try to pick and choose, and that's where we start ending up making mistakes in terms of oh, you think you want to get rid of mosquitoes, but then there's some weird fucking negative effect down the line where you're like, well, shit, I didn't see this one coming.
Yeah,
thought everything hated mosquitoes.
Well, there's a variation of a mosquito that just drinks sweat. That's not a problem. The little sweat fly like things. Then mosquitoes are the blood sucking variation. And one of them helps to clean up dead things, and the other one just delivers malaria. But you kill one and you kill the other. I think that's one of the things that I read about mosquitoes. Be like if we tried to eradicate all fungus, we'd end up with so much garbage and trash just laying around, or just garbage, refuse that we just wouldn't be able to process. It would take forever to break down. It would leave all sorts of chemicals. It blows my mind, the kind of things that fungus will render into dirt.
It's magical.
Yeah. And it helps that there's some flies puking on it all day long too, because they're also ingesting some of the secretions from those fungus. So we can't get rid of the damn flies, because if we do, we can't. We might lose our fungus like decomposition factor. It's terrible, man. How do we can't do anything about mosquitoes. Bastards. Maybe we could lose the mosquitoes during the next ice age. There's a way to do this. A really concentrated effort on behalf of all humanities to eradicate just the mosquitoes. And this is the stuff of hardcore science fiction, actually.
Or our skin should evolve so that their stupid little
their proboscis.
Yeah, can't penetrate it.
Fucking needle straw tongue bastards.
Yeah. Well, that's also another, I wonder how many generations will start seeing differences in human beings in terms of like the response to industrialization. Like, I don't feel like our biology has even remotely caught up in terms of adjusting. Like, there's things that industrialization does to like make our experience worse, like in terms of sitting a lot and making back problems happen. And on the other hand, nutrients are more available, so people are definitely bigger.
Bioavailable nutrients everywhere.
As far as like everything else, it seems like that's about it. Is like we're bigger and we sit more.
But we in theory we could have the opportunity to move around enough to offset the sitting and potentially like improve the body, even though there's so much seat time. You just can't have kids. Because nobody has time once they have kids.
Yeah.
I love all my friends and their kids. Their kids are great. But it's close enough for me.
Yeah.
There's like still too much stuff that I want to do. That's like that's one of those things that it like once you realize how much time actually exists between like let's just say it's the moment one graduates from high school and a reasonable expectation of life, another 50 something years, whatever the life expectancy for the average person or man in North America. I think it's like 70 something. But you give this reasonable expectation of living another 50 years. Like, that's actually not that much time when you can consider a third of that time is spent asleep. And then let's just be generous and say that it's like a quarter of the time. So like 12 years is spent asleep. And so, because nobody's actually going to spend a third of that time asleep. We all lose a significant amount of sleep between the age of 20 and like 35, I think. And and then you got to work. There's probably some school involved. There's a lot of driving to and from places. There's a lot of time spent eating. There's a lot of time spent in the bathroom. It doesn't leave a lot of time for the things that people actually want to do. Unless they like start out like independently wealthy or able to, or like really lucky. But I don't know many people in high school who were like set out to like frame houses all day long. That was going to be the thing. Or I don't know many people who set out to sit in a room behind a computer and type all day long. And I realize that distills things down to very basic variations of a lot of jobs, but I don't think any of those kind of. I mean, there are modern construction methods that use machines and technology to increase the speed of building things, and there are technologies now that can write out entire term papers and get a B plus on a final. So. Do you think things would stay the same, get weirder, or maybe even improve if we could actually, if humanity could actually automate away a lot of the things that eat up the time? Would things actually get better if people had more time to do more interesting things? Or do people even have more interesting things to do?
I don't think they know how to do interesting things. And I think that's part of it, is like too many people have depended upon capitalism to give them or to sell them interesting things. And now that it's not really producing those interesting things, like they never developed their own interesting hobbies to actually take up their time. So it's like you give people more time now, and if they don't have anything to consume, they're not going to do anything with that time. Not everybody, of course, but a lot of Americans. And I think just knowing how I think a lot of Americans work because they don't have anything else to do, because if they had other things to occupy their time, they wouldn't be working as often as they did, or wanting to be at a job, and would want to do remote work, because the more time you spend commuting and the more time you spend going to the office back and forth is the less time you can do other shit. So it's like knowing how Americans responded to things that would give them more time, more free time. It's like they don't want more free time because they don't know what to do with it. As far as I can tell, or from what my perception is. And that's where, that's why it feels like a lot of Americans don't want the Star Trek future, because when you have to decide for yourself what you're going to do with your time, how you're going to improve yourself, that's a lot of fucking responsibility. And then if it doesn't work out, then you are the only person to be responsible for the blame, which is what a lot of people don't want to deal with.
Yeah, but only like less than 1% of any of all populations in the Federation are even capable of becoming like part of Starfleet. Less than 1%.
Guess what? That's the only fucking 1% we care about.
That's true.
Do you give a fuck what Benjamin Sisko's dad's doing in his goddamn restaurant? No. Because we're not following his goddamn father who didn't join the Federation.
Or he's not in Starfleet. Yeah.
Only 1% is eligible.
Fuck, even if
we only fucking give it one.
Even if it's the only 0.1% of all members of the Federation are eligible to be in Starfleet, like that's still the most interesting part of the story.
Only interesting part of the story, which a lot of humans don't want to accept. It's like, at the end of the day, that's why you have to make your shit more important to your immediate group, because you got to go through some extraordinary steps to make other people give a fuck about you.
Yeah.
In terms of doing something that actually benefits either the rest of humanity or makes you important in some way. And it's like, man, like, I don't necessarily like the guy, but even Barack Obama, like, he used to be the fucking president, and now hardly anybody gives a fuck about that dude.
I think
George W. Bush used to be the president. How hardly anybody gives a fuck about that dude.
I think the Obamas just signed a new podcast deal.
Oh, they're doing shit.
I don't know anything about what
nobody-
their podcast is.
Nobody
about.
gives a fuck. Nobody gives a fuck because you know exactly what they were what they were doing if you actually gave a fuck. And that's what I mean in terms of like, you don't really give a fuck.
No.
You don't. I don't give a fuck either. I don't give a fuck.
I think I only read that because it was on oh god, it was on some kind of industry information publication.
And it's like, I don't really give a fuck about what Joe Biden's doing, except for the fact that, like, is he still alive or not? That's about as much of a fuck as I give about the sitting president. So that's what I mean. Again, like, Obama wasn't a great president. He wasn't the worst president. He did a bunch of horrible shit. He did some decent shit. But it's easy to forget Obama even existed sometimes, let alone look at him like a hero this far out of his tenure in office. It's like, again, if you thought really hard, I'm sure you could think of some good stuff he did. And if you thought really hard, you could think of some absolutely horrible stuff he did. But it's a matter of the way that attention works. Like, the human mind is very fickle, and society's memory is even more fickle. So that's where it's nothing, it's not anybody's fault, but you really gotta actually like be some David Bowie level impact, but also not do some horrible shit for people to remember you outside of your time at all, let alone look at a person as like someone to be glorified as a hero or even mentioned by history. It's like, okay, think of it this way. How many millions of people fought against Hitler and their fucking names are forgotten to history? Their families remember. There's some fucking monument somewhere that probably remembers. But does history remember? No. History don't give a fuck. And those people fought Hitler. Which, again, it sounds like it's not. It's a reality of like history's memory being very fickle, that I think once people accept it, it's a lot easier to move and operate for your local people. Because the more you try to live for like your non-local people, the more people are going to forget you. So it's like knowing, like, most things that have existed are forgotten, let alone people that have existed. And the easier that people deal with that, the more that they can impact their people that actually care about them's lives, instead of trying to work for some shit that's not going to remember them next week, let alone next year.
So you want people to work on long-term memory
and their personal relationships. Those two things, if America worked on those two things specifically, that's like 99% of our problems. Right there.
It's interesting. On the days that I completely ignore the internet, I feel better about everything. I feel better about like taking the trash out and putting it in the back of the truck. Or I feel better about cleaning the litter box. And it's because I don't have all this like extra noise. I mean, I guess it's important to get basic updates about the war between Ukraine and Russia. That stuff's kind of interesting, actually. And there's all sorts of strange tension with China, of course. Got to keep abreast of that. None of these things are... I can't do anything about any of this stuff. I don't even care about, like, the latest phone that's probably being released, or the latest. I don't know what Super Mario Brothers movie. Why did they make another Super Mario movie?
Yeah, it's a damn good question.
See, these are things that I don't really know anything about, and I didn't need to know anything about, and I probably will regret knowing about now, because this is just like idea pollution.
It's funny. Like, I basically just checked the news to make sure that World War III hasn't started yet, and then eventually fall down some rabbit hole that is like ultimately negative and ends in some like very frustrating point. So it is like we're getting to a point where the question has to be asked, like, what good does it do anyone to find out information about something they can't do anything about?
I mean, has World War III started?
No.
Oh, well, that's good.
Yeah, no, not yet.
That's good. There's still time to not have World War III.
But then anything else I found out, like, what good did that do me? And I'm really getting a lot better about filtering information that's like still actually only really going to be useful to me at the end of the day, in terms of like why I'm consuming it. But it's difficult. It's not easy to consume things that actually help. But I'm getting better about like filtering out shit where I'm like, this doesn't help. It doesn't. I can't do anything about it. The fact that I'm watching it doesn't make me feel better about anything. It makes me feel worse. So why am I watching this? And it's a lot easier to not end up there.
I know when I'm watching the right stuff, because I feel like I'm in like taking a master class in something.
Exactly.
That's how you know.
Whether it's entertaining or learning.
Exceptional radio.
Exceptional Randos shows produced live in Sunroom Studios' Base Capsule. Remember to catch our Exceptional Randos live stream on YouTube every Sunday between 2 and 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you have a story, idea, or question that you would like to share, we want to hear from you. Thanks for listening.
Well, that was random. Exceptional radio.